Hello and welcome to ProductTank Cardiff. I'm Buff Curdley, one of the co-organizers here and your moderator for today. For newly joined, I can assure that we have a treat for you. Before we kick things off, the running order for today will be as follows. A quick introduction to ProductTank and Mind the Product. A little bit about the team here in Cardiff that makes this possible, as well as one of the most important part of the event, the speakers themselves, Nick and Colleen. A little bit about ProductTank that is worth noting. ProductTank is a global community made of product and tech people that are passionate in building great products users cherish. Adjacent to that, you have Mind the Product, who run conferences across the world. And recently they have introduced a learning portal for members who would like to learn more about products and much more. The Cardiff team that makes this possible is Alex, Kai, and myself. Our community here in Wales is bi-monthly, and we operate predominantly on the format of bringing guest speakers that would talk about different topics that are relevant and current in our specific discipline. We also do social evenings, virus permitted, as well as that our next event will be in November. The date needs to be confirmed, which we will do. You also could get involved through Slack, Twitter, or Meetup. When we run product tanks in physical locations such as Trump Shed, we normally do seek for local companies to sponsor us. As with that, we have some costing to cover. And any company that is local or non-local but would like to tap into the smartest people in product and tech, I think it's worthwhile to have a conversation should you wish to engage with us, either with myself, Kai, or Alex. As I said, we have two great speakers with us tonight. Nick Beals, who's the Chief Product Officer of Alforza, which so happens Alforza is a local tech company based here and are growing from strength to strength. Nick will be talking to us about challenges of learning new verticals quickly and how to carve great products for those industries. Colleen is a product manager at Airbnb and working in innovative payment solutions. Colleen will cover a very interesting topic that made, I guess, scaled up Airbnb to the point where they are today, what it means to be doing things that don't scale first, and how it will improve your product. Without further ado, I would like to invite Nick to give us a little bit of perspective about how did Nick got to the product first, and equally more importantly, to tell us more about what exciting things are happening at Alforza, as well as the topic for today. So Nick, over to you.
Thank you very much. and good evening, everyone. I've got about 20 minutes today, so I'm going to talk to you about building an industry product and specifically about the experience I've had here at my latest company of Forza, building an industry product from scratch and then actually getting that into the hands of a customer within a year. So just a quick agenda. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to myself and to our current company, and then I'm actually going to take you through, what is an industry product, because it is a term that not everyone will have heard. So I'm going to explain that to you in a bit more detail, and then I'm going to talk about, what are the different building blocks you need to build an industry product, and then how do you put it all together. A lot of what I'm going to talk to you today about is very much focused on the experience of building for an industry, but a lot of it is applicable across regular horizontal products as well. So even if you're not interested in building for a specific vertical or a specific industry, I think there should be some takeaways or some lessons that you can hopefully learn from this. All right, let's start with a little brief introduction to me. My name is Nick Eels. I'm currently the Chief Product Officer of Forza. And my background is very much in engineering. I went to Cardiff University here a while ago, studied computer science, and immediately after university, I joined a Welsh startup, which so happened to get acquired by Salesforce. If you don't know Salesforce, they're one of the largest software companies in the world now, huge CRM system provider, B2B. And my career to date has really been focused around that enterprise B2B cloud software space. And I've done a range of different roles across product management, but also in pre-sales and engineering. So I've got a good understanding of what it takes to build a product, but then also what it takes to present that product to a customer successfully and get their feedback to build right back into the product again. And it's only recently in the my previous couple of companies that I've been working on what are called industry products. And that is really taking the power of the cloud and software and really focusing it very sharply and honing it in on specific verticals. So a little bit about Forza before we get into the presentation. So Forza is a company based in Cardiff, a global company which we're basing in Cardiff that is building products for the consumer goods industry. So a consumer goods company is really anyone that sells you or me, a consumer, drinks or food or any product really that you can find on a store shelf. They are our target customers. We were founded in April 2019, so about a year and a half ago now. We are being backed by a number of Silicon Valley VCs and also the Welsh government. And as I mentioned, our HQ is in Cardiff, so all of our R&D and our back office functions are all based in Cardiff, and we've got plans to grow that significantly, which I'm really excited about. But as I mentioned, we're a global company, so our sales teams are based various different locations around the world. And we are focusing on selling in lots of different markets across Europe, Africa, the Americas, Asia, etc. And our products are very much focused on cloud and mobile solutions and a lot of AI as well. We do 3 major software releases a year across 4 platforms. So a huge amount of coordination is needed to make sure that we're releasing on time successfully and in sync across all of these different platforms. And like I mentioned, we went from 0 product in April of last year to winning our flagship customer in under a year. We actually won Heineken, which is a great brand for us, obviously, during the middle of the pandemic. So we've been very fortunate, but we're obviously doing something, or I like to think we're doing something right as well to be able to do that. All right, so let's talk about what an industry product actually is. So these are the products you're probably more familiar with. You might not have heard the term horizontal product, but it's really kind of the everyday product that is made for everyone. So these could be consumer products, they could be business products, but they're typically given a huge amount of wide generic functionality that is going to be applicable to 99% of people. So a really simple example of that is Gmail or any other email provider, right? Everyone sends emails. It's a very easy, normal thing to do. So it's applicable to everyone and you just use it. What you'll find though is for specific types of companies that might have different requirements or niche requirements, software that is horizontal typically needs to be heavily customized to meet those needs. So if you're looking at business software, you might take an out-of-the-box platform product, but then you need to pay a services company to come in and customize it heavily to meet your specific requirements, which can be quite costly and not exactly what you want to do when you're buying software. So more recently, this term has been growing in popularity, and that's vertical or industry products. And these are products that are focused on meeting the requirements and the use cases of a single specific industry. And that means they tend to have very, very deep specialized functionality that is not going to be applicable to everyone, but it is going to be fantastic for the industry that you're targeting. And these are highly valuable and highly desirable by those companies because it means they get to pick something off the shelf, do very little configuration to it, and be up and running. The analogy that I've always heard is, would you prefer to get, vanilla software, or would you like the insurance flavor of software, right? If you're an insurance company, it's kind of a no-brainer. You're not going to pick the vanilla one. You're going to pick the insurance flavored one, right? So let's go through a little example just to get your minds thinking about this. A really simple example that everyone has experience with is buying something, right? So if I need to place an order, this is a simplistic view of it, but you need to view the product, you need to view a price, and then you add it to your cart. And you might add some tax onto that as well. But for a horizontal product, this is the basics. This is what you do. But in reality, every industry is different, right? The automotive industry, if you're buying a car, there's this configuration step where you have to go in and choose your wheels, choose the color of the car. Do you want automatic or manual transmission? And when you do that, they typically are going to jack the price up because you've picked all the extras, and then you purchase it. When you're buying a new mobile phone, right, for the telecommunications industry, you've got that configure step and the purchase step, but there's also this provisioning where your SIM card needs to be activated on the network that no other industry has to do. And then for consumer goods, which is what we're kind of targeting at the moment, you don't just have a straight price, you've got these concepts of promotions and discounts. So there's like buy two, get one free, etc. And that needs to be factored into the order capture process. And then there's a whole bill back process where the retailer has to go and request money, right? It gets very convoluted, and the processes are very distinct. And this is why industry products have a huge amount of value, because if I was an automotive company or a telecommunications company and I bought the horizontal order capture, I've got a huge number of steps that I have to customize or build, which is extremely difficult to do. All right, so now we know what an industry product is. Let's kind of go through a couple of the key building blocks that myself I've used several times to build out these industry products. So let's take a step back. Before I talk about the product itself, let's look at what successful product management looks like, because this is directly applicable. And I'm sure everyone on this call has seen some version of this slide. It's no secret, but it's worth reiterating. So to be a good product manager, you need to have, 1 foot in the technical camp. You need to know how to speak to developers. You need to know the limitations of the feasibility of a solution on the technical side. You need to understand what goes into making a good user experience, right? If you got just the technical side of it, but it looks like a database from the 1980s, it's not going to be a good product, right? So you need to have a good understanding of user experience, the visual side of things, and how you make the product look good and behave appropriately for the use cases. And then probably most importantly, you need to have 1 foot in the business camp. You need to understand how to get customer requirements, how to apply those to an MVP, how to create the use cases, and then how to translate those business requirements into the technical tickets that your developers need to work on. And if you're a product manager, you might have come from any one of these backgrounds. You might have come from a technical background. Maybe you're a creative that's come from designing products and now you want to build them. Or maybe you're coming from a business background where you know the pain points and you want to start addressing them. That's absolutely fine. But to be a really, really good product manager, you want to know all of that stuff, right? You want to be able to be the interchange between those three different sections. Building an industry product is very similar, right? You need to know those three different areas, and you need to know them very well to be able to actually execute and build a really, really good industry product. So first and foremost, you need to have deep, deep industry knowledge, right? For a generic horizontal product, you can get away with just having a veneer of knowledge. But for an industry product, if you're not going really deep with those use cases and you don't understand the industry properly, then you're going to quickly fail. And it's going to be very evident that you don't know what you're talking about. So that's number one. Number two is you need to work out for those use cases for that industry, what are the right technologies to use? And they'll typically be modern technologies, cloud-based technologies, something that scales for the demands. The use cases tend to be a lot more sophisticated when you go deep into an industry than otherwise. And then the user experience, and really this is applicable across all product types, but I think in today's day and age, there's no excuse for not having a consumer grade user experience. Everyone that uses your applications, even if it's a B2B application, they're going to be consumers that have mobile phones, they use apps on a day-to-day basis. And if you turn up with a terrible user experience, your adoption rates are going to drop and your product is just going to flop, right? So let's take a look at each of these in a bit more detail. All right, so on the business side, when you're building an industry product, the number one thing you have to do is learn. So you can build an industry product without ever having known anything about that industry. I did it at my previous company I was working at. I knew nothing about the insurance industry or the telecommunications industry other than what I as a consumer have interacted with it as. But you're able to quickly learn that stuff if you apply yourself. And if you learn it, you can generate extremely good products, but you have to put the work in. So learning it, some of the top tips I would give is, look at what competitors are doing, speak to prospects, speak to partners, understand the use cases, understand the terminology. Different industries have different terms for essentially the same thing. And just being able to speak the customer's language will go a long way to getting your credibility there. Now, as you're learning, what you want to do then is start prototyping, right? You want to come up with an MVP, essentially. And it doesn't need to be something technical. It doesn't need to be even a mock-up, but even just a design document of what you're intending to build. You want to do that. And then once you've done that, you want to demo it. So this is really an iterative cycle. This is essentially building an MVP and learning from it. But the key takeaways are even more important for industry products. So you want to do this, you want to iterate, you want to do it extremely quickly to try and capitalize. But the main purpose here is just to learn. And if you have one of these guys, that is going to make your life so much easier. So if you have someone in your network, a partner, anyone that has worked in the industry and can advise you on it, that you can ask questions or interview, that is going to go a long way to helping you really get to those deep use cases that you need to know to build a successful industry product. Right, the second piece, the technical piece. Once you know the use cases, once you know what you need to build, you have to work out the technical foundation to build it. This is probably the most critical thing you can do when you're building your products, as you probably know. If you don't get the foundation right, in a year's time, everything's just going to come toppling down. So that means you need to pick the right platform or provider, the right technology, the right programming languages even. And when you've done that, you have to build the right set of data to support the use cases. So building a data model isn't the most glamorous of things, but it's extremely important that you have that data model in place and it is functionally going to work for all of these use cases from day one. The other thing you can do is also look into partnership opportunities as a startup. So GCP, AWS, Azure, they all give startup credits, a lot of startup credits if you go to them. Salesforce lets you develop on there for free completely until you have a customer. So huge amount of opportunity there to just do stuff in a lean way or to bootstrap it. And you shouldn't really let this dictate your technical approach, but it's definitely going to have it's going to have some sway, especially if you're looking for a way to do this on the cheap. And then you want to innovate. So you don't want to just rebuild what your competitors are doing. You need to find a way to disrupt the industry. You need to find a pain point or a use case that you can really kill. And what you should be doing is looking at what the new technologies are out there today, whether it's AI, whether it's augmented reality, any other buzzword you can think of. You want to take a look at those, and you want to see if there's any real value in those that are applicable to your industry customers. And if you can't do any of that, find yourself someone that can, right? This doesn't need to be a CTO. It could be a really good engineer. It could be a partner, but you need to be able to do this. And there's a lot of people that you could partner with to figure this stuff out. And then last but not least, the user experience. So as I mentioned before, there's no excuse today not to have consumer grade user experiences. If I am an employee and I'm trying to use an application, it needs to look good. It needs to have the right processes in place. If I have to do 10 clicks to get to a screen that should take 1 click, I am not going to use that software anymore, right? So there's no excuse. You need to make sure it works and it looks good. And I'm not going to go through the whole user experience process because that could take days on its own, and I'm not an expert in it. But just some of the key things I would call out are user testing, especially in the industry when you are talking to industries that have call centers or industries that have a lot of sales reps on the road, right? Try and do some user testing with those people. And that is going to go a long way to making sure you have the best experience possible for your end customer. I'm also a big fan of consistency. So making sure that your website and your brand reaches not just on the website, but also on your marketing collateral, into your mobile app, into your web apps. If you don't have a consistent brand or consistent user experience across your entire application suite, then it's just going to come across as disjointed, and it's really not going to do any favors to you as a company or to your product as well. And again, if you can't do this stuff, find yourself someone that can. There's a lot of really good creative directors, UX designers, UI designers that you can speak to that will be able to help you out with this stuff. All right, so they're the building blocks. How do we put it all together? And it's really simple. First thing you got to do is learn something. You've got to go in and learn something about the industry you are targeting. So whether it's how they do an order capture process, or it's a pain they have, or it's something they wish they could do better, right? Just go and learn something. From that, define a good use case, come up with something you think is going to be applicable, that's going to help solve that problem. And then once you've done that, build something that solves the problem, right? Find the right technical strategy or the right technical approach that's going to help you solve that problem, and prototype it. Number 4, make it look good. Number 4 could arguably go before number 3. You should never really do your user experience before building, after building the prototype. But I've just put them in this order, right? So you want to make sure something looks good as well. So when you're building that MVP, if it's a load of wireframe boxes or gray squares, nobody's going to give it a second look. So make sure it looks compelling. Make sure that you prepare it so when you're about to demo it, it's got the right data in there as well. And it comes across really well to your prospects. The last point is demo it. Show it to a prospect, show it to a friend, show it to an advisor, and get their feedback. And they might hate it, they might love it. Hopefully they like it. But what you're going to get from that every single time is you're going to learn something new again. They're going to say, this is great, but have you thought about this? Or I wish you could do this a bit better, or this isn't relevant. And there's no bad feedback. You're going to learn something, and you can apply this iterative cycle again and again. And what's eventually going to happen as you keep doing this and doing it fast is you're eventually going to succeed. And that success might be different things. That might be getting a customer. It might be getting funding. It might just be getting good feedback for the first time, right? Or finding a partner that you can expand your company with. But with the help of your team, hopefully you've got some great salespeople that you can call on, or some pre-sales engineers to help you out as you get going. Eventually, you're going to succeed and you're going to close a customer. And that's what you want to do. You want to build a product and you want to close that first customer. All right, so just a couple of really quick use cases to show you, this in practice. So capture orders. So this was a use case we needed for consumer goods. Capture orders on a mobile app while offline. Very similar to what we were talking about before. You needed promotions in there. We decided on a technical foundation of React Native for a variety of different reasons. We looked at user experiences that we could take inspiration from. And then we came up with, after many iterations, we came up with a finished product, which we think looks pretty good. And this is actually what our customer is going to be using. Different use case then, we needed to have a way for sales reps to plan a route of visits to stores. So they need to go around all of the Tesco's in Cardiff, for instance. We decided on a technical foundation. We just looked at user experiences for similar kind of mapping applications. And then we came up with our software after a couple of iterations. And again, we've managed to sell this and our customers are going to be using it. And these are just individual use cases, but what you're eventually going to get to is building out an entire platform, entire suite of applications using this approach. And this is really what you're looking to get to, is that nirvana of industry applications, or an industry app that combines a load of different use cases. Right, so in summary, just to wrap things up, industry products are highly valuable to customers. So if you've never built an industry product before and you've been kind of thinking of what use cases you might want to look at, I would highly recommend considering looking or going after a specific industry as opposed to just building something generic. They tend to be highly valuable, they tend to be sought after, and once you're in there, they tend to be very, very sticky, right? Customers have problems turning them off as long as you are good software. Building them doesn't require a PhD. You don't need to be an expert in the industry. You can learn it from scratch. I've done it before. You have to apply yourself, but it's doable, and you can be successful. And then make the right technology and UX choices for that industry. Once you've understood the use cases, make sure you're doing the right technical approach and you're making the right design decisions based on those use cases. And then probably the most important point is just demo it again and again. Show it to your customers, show it to prospects, advisors, whoever, and just make sure you're going in the right direction every single time. So with that, we're going to do maybe some Q&A, but thank you for your time. Hope you found it useful or valuable. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nick, for that insight from the industry products. And it's quite interesting, the B2B model, how that has come a long way. Before we got a couple of questions for you, but I'm quite intrigued to know what you just mentioned earlier on, which is, from a consumer product versus industry products. What would you say some of the challenges are when you talk to your customers? Because your customers are the businesses. What are some of the things that you have come across that someone who could have some use cases for or thinking about could start preparing for?
Well, that's a difficult question. That's how long is a piece of string? Every business, no matter what industry you're in, has a lot of challenges. Whether it is, to give you a simple example, order capture. How do I capture an order accurately without any human error? How do I make sure it's priced correctly? How do I make sure that order flows down to the invoicing system correctly and finance is able to reconcile it? There's hundreds of challenges for any single business in B2B. The processes are always convoluted. There's always efficiencies that need to be improved. So if you start going looking, you're going to find some very quickly. And we're targeting a full platform of applications with our product, but you could do very well just doing order capture. right? Just choosing one niche of that industry that you want to really focus on. And I guarantee you're going to find customers that have pains in that area that you can solve.
And actually, that itself fits pretty well into this question by Kai, which actually says, what processes and tools have you used to help learn about new industries, domains as quickly as possible?
It's a good question. I mean, your number one friend is Google, obviously. You can you just search for the type of industry you're targeting, and you'll typically find some sort of similar to ProductTank. There's going to be some sort of organization that is the kind of the knowledge base for that industry, that is going to have blog posts, that is going to have you know, magazines, whatever it might be, right? And there's going to be articles you can read. That's the number one spot to go. Number two is look at what competitors are actually building. You're going to very quickly see what is needed by that industry by looking at software that is being sold to that industry. So if you can do that, that's going to be the best starting point for understanding what it is you need to start building.
Very interesting. I don't think we have another question by Craig, which says, how granular should the industry be? Nick mentioned Heineken, customer. Is the product they now use only usable by the organizations in the alcohol industry?
That's a great question. So the answer is no, right? Well, the answer is sometimes you could build a product that is specifically targeting a segment of an industry, like the beverages industry, right? That's what Heineken is in. That is completely viable, and you can do that. However, you know, if you expand your scope a bit, you can absolutely target every segment within an industry. For instance, in consumer goods, there's a distinct difference between the way the US and UK go to market versus the Middle East or Africa or Asia, right? They all go to market in completely different ways. There's difference between the beverage industry and, you know, the tobacco industry or the food industry or healthcare product industry. So it's typically about finding that kind of middle ground, almost like doing a horizontal product for that industry, and then also building out the use cases that are needed by each of those individual segments. So again, how long is a piece of string? You could target one, you could target all of them, but just do it in a clever way.
Well, thank you so much, Nick. We will not take any more of your time. We are so grateful that you actually have contributed to our local ProductTank community, and I'm sure our paths will cross soon. And we wish you all the very best with Alforsa, and hopefully Alforsa will be a company that could potentially be the first unicorn of companies in Wales, at least.
Oh, that would be nice. I wouldn't say no to that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nick. And I wish you a good evening.
Perfect. Thanks for the opportunity.
Take care. Our next up, second speaker of the day is Colleen, which I will. I'm super excited to welcome. Hi, Colleen. How are you doing?
Hi. Great. Hello, everyone.
Colleen, take it away.
Thanks, Bath. So we're going to double down on some of the things that Nick talked about before me on the importance of learning. And when we talk about learning, we're going to talk about doing things that don't scale. So let's jump in. I like to start with this quote. At Y Combinator, we were challenged to do things that don't scale, to start with the perfect experience for one person, then work backwards and schedule it to 100 people who love us. That was the best piece of advice we've ever received. This quote comes from Brian Chesky, our CEO of Airbnb, and Airbnb was part of Y Combinator in the winter class of 2009. And this mantra of do things that don't scale really is a Y Combinator thing. And it's something that has become a big part of the DNA at Airbnb in terms of how we do product. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We are going to talk about in the 20 minutes together what it means to actually do things that don't scale, because a lot of times you hear this as a tagline, but what does it actually mean? And part of explaining what that means, we're going to go through some real examples of how this works using some of the things that we've done in the product teams I've worked on at Airbnb. To get into the concept of what it means to do things that don't scale, I love talking about what not to do, or lessons learned the hard way, in terms of a typical approach where we may not be using this mantra of doing things that don't scale, and explaining why it could have worked better, or why we could have maybe reframed it with a different approach to have better results. And some quick background on me. My name is Colleen-Do, as Beth mentioned, and I've currently at Airbnb have worked at a bunch of different companies over the 15 years I've spent in product, both B2B, B2C, different industries, consumer products, digital products. And this concept of doing things that don't scale was really resonated, and I've really learned a lot about it at Airbnb, and reflecting on it in my career, it can definitely apply to a lot of the past experiences I had. And it's something that I'm going to carry forward with me regardless of where I go next. And so jumping into one of those specific experiences, this is the example of what not to do in terms of learning about how to do things that don't scale. And this specifically was an Etsy business that I started back in 2017. And at that point, I was deciding, whether or not I was wanting to investigate doing this full time. And, I went through and actually started this business and went through a typical process. This may sound familiar. First started with sourcing in terms of what I was actually going to have as the product. This was like jewelry. I lived in Ecuador at the time, and there's artisanal products, a lot of like textiles and things in the city of Otavalo outside of Quito, Ecuador. And, I noticed there are these really interesting artisanal products, and especially jewelry made out of seeds from the Amazon rainforest. And I got them as gifts for a lot of friends and family. People came to visit, they bought it as gifts for people when they went home, and everyone always they got so many compliments. Everyone always asked where they got it from, et cetera. And it was like, maybe this is an idea of something I can explore. And so I was like, maybe, why don't I take this back to the US and see if this is a business that I can build? So did the typical things that I learned in business school, market research and building a business plan, did some surveys of potential customers, started thinking about how I would maybe price this, put together the start of a business plan. Next step, had to come up with the logo and the perfect name, actually hired a graphic designer to help me with this, putting together all the photos and the marketing materials, got product photos made and put together, some postcards and some things like that to have marketing materials to hand out to potential customers, and also have photos to feature on website, et cetera. Then I finally set up my Etsy shop. But I was like, what? I also need a website because I need to explain more about the story and the materials and the artisans that I'm working with. Then eventually started doing some street fairs, selling the product, getting it in front of customers. Eventually got it into a few retail stores, and came back full circle and ended up learning that where I was having the most traction was on my Etsy shop. Realized that I spent no time really setting it up in the best possible way to maximize my sales. And also along the way, learned that having a business in retail fashion and doing wholesale trade shows and stuff like that wasn't something I loved. And so decided to have this around as a side hobby, and just went and doubled down on the Etsy optimization, was able to actually increase my conversion by over 200% on the store alone by doing small things and just tweaking and based on what I was learning about what people were buying and how people were finding my product. So I go through this because there was a lot of lessons learned here for me. And as I think back across my career, it all sounds very similar to how I've done product launches in the past, how companies that I've worked for have approached product launches in the past. And these steps may sound familiar to you. When I was talking about the market research, the business plan, my logo, my sourcing, all of that, I find a lot of times we do opportunity sizing and research and impact assessments and effort estimates where we're trying to build some sort of prioritization framework in terms of what features we're going to put on our roadmap, and we end up with the roadmap of what we plan to do over the next quarter, the next year. Then we go into product specs and building out more requirements, building more prototypes, increasing in levels of fidelity, building out user stories, etc. And then we finally get it in front of our users, which is exactly what happened to me with my Etsy shop or my jewelry business. And do we ever get the results we expect in the first iteration? I think the answer is probably not. I've never seen, most of the time, everything going exactly as planned, because we can't see the future. And when you think back on it, all that planning and research, quite frankly, in my case with my Etsy shop especially, was a waste of time. You probably heard as I was explaining the story, and I'm like, oh, I had to have a logo and a name, and I spent this time and money on a graphic designer. Waste of time. I actually even had business cards made because I was like, oh, I have to have business cards before I could be in a street show or like a street fair or, make any attempt to sell to a retail store. They're not going to take me seriously. Spoiler alert, 10 years later, I still have those business cards. I've used about 2 of them, but I keep them as a reminder of this exact concept of I should have gotten in front of my customers a lot earlier. I should have learned a lot faster. And a lot of the activities that I was doing wasn't necessarily helping me do that, but it was making me feel better in terms of, oh, I uncovered all the stones and I did my proper research, so therefore my launch is going to be successful, but I never got in front of users. And that's one of the core components of doing things that don't scale. So let's flip it around. Let's look at it another way. So if I were to have embraced that concept of doing things that don't scale, and quite frankly, if I were to go back in time to my younger self in 2011 and talk about how I would have launched this business, I would have structured it a very different way. What would I have done? The very first thing I would have done is set up my Etsy shop. The cost there was 0. It's 20 cents to list something, and I could have very easily taken some decent photos with an iPhone at the time and just get my shop set up and start learning what people were interested in actually buying. And the place where I actually learned the most was those street fairs. Why? Because I had live customers in front of me. I could play around with the pricing. At the street fair, I could literally change the price from the morning to the afternoon to see if that made people buy it more. I could also change how I displayed it. I could see people live in terms of their selection process, them trying it on, the concerns that they had, learned a ton about potential customers there. And that could have all helped me optimize my Etsy shop. I could have done that much earlier to increase the conversion, which I did much later, which would have told me what photos I should have invested in, which would have told me which inventory I should have invested in. And again, spoiler alert, I still have some inventory from 2011 because it was something that, I thought would be interesting or something people would buy, and I had too much of it. And needless to say, it's still in my closet. These are all lessons learned, right? Lessons learned the hard way. And when I think about my experience with starting my Etsy shop, and I think about how I would reframe product launches, a lot of this goes back to just getting started and learning as fast as you possibly can. And I think about every time I look at my business cards, I think about one of the founding stories that I think really, really exemplifies this do things that do not scale, and how I could have applied that to my Etsy shop, the founding story of Zappos. I won't spend time going too far into this because this is a fairly well-known story. Just Google founding story Zappos and you'll get all the details. But the short story is the founder went to a shoe store, took pictures of the shoes with his phone or a camera that he had, went home, put them on a website. And then when somebody ordered the shoes that he put on the website, he went to the store, bought the shoes at the store, went home, sent them to his customer. And that's how he started his business. The typical approach would have been to get all the inventory and do all the market analysis, et cetera, but that would have been a waste of time and money. What he learned, even though that didn't scale, was what people were willing to buy online, what shipping policies resonated, what return policies resonated. And he used that to then build out the business. And it went much faster than it would have. And if I had done this again for my Etsy shop, it would have gone a lot faster as well. So let's flip this around. Let's talk about some more examples in terms of what it means to do things that don't scale. And we'll talk about it in real life using some examples from products that I've worked on at Airbnb. So at Airbnb, we've taken this concept of doing things that don't scale. What it means for us is imagining the ideal outcome. If we go back to that original quote from Brian, we talk about the ideal outcome as that perfect experience for the one person. So imagining the ideal outcome is really stretching your mind. It's thinking about what would be amazing? What would be incredibly delightful? What would be exciting for our users? We figure out what that is, and then you work backwards to figure out how to scale it. And so it's really this emphasis on learning and potentially learning with one person or a very small group of people so that you're able to do it fast and you're able to do things that don't scale. For those of you who don't know Airbnb, at this point in time, it's a very different company than when it was in 2008 when it started with our 3 founders. We have over 7 million listings. We're in over 100,000 cities, over 220 countries, and we've had over 750 million guests stay with us. On any given night, there's about 2 million people in an Airbnb. And our experiences business, we have over 50,000 experiences worldwide in over 1,000 cities. And so the company's come a long way in terms of refining its product and achieving the mission of belonging anywhere. And where we're going to deep dive is into the experiences business. That's the business I was actually part of for a lot of my time at Airbnb. And for those of you who don't know, Airbnb has experiences in addition to having places to stay on the platform. And experiences are one-of-a-kind activities hosted by experts. This gives you a little bit of an idea in terms of what they are. You could do a music history and culture tour with a DJ in Havana, Cuba. You could do a mole cooking class with an indigenous cook in Mexico City. And these are all experiences that are part of our vision and mission of belonging anywhere. When we think about how Airbnb handled the experiences launch, this is a great example of doing things that don't scale. When we talk about imagining the ideal outcome, what the team actually did when they were in incubation, they went out and they found travelers either on our site or in random places like Pier 39 in San Francisco, and they crafted personal experiences for these people. So it's like you're having an anniversary or a birthday celebration or a proposal, or you're in San Francisco and you just want to learn more about the city. And they craft, personalized experiences for these people. It was actually quite like the original 3 guests that stayed in the founder's apartment. That's part of the founding story of Airbnb, because they didn't just give them a place to stay for the design conference. They took them around San Francisco. They had them hang out with their friends and really gave them the experience of what it was like to live like a local. And they formed a connection with those 3 original guests and still talk to them today. And so when we think about the imagining the ideal outcome, that was exactly the essence of what we wanted to bring and scale to, the thousands and potentially millions of people that would go on Airbnb experiences. When we think about figuring out how to scale, we had to redefine Airbnb and add a new product line. Won't go into this a ton because it's also something that's pretty well written about from the founders and stories that they've done on different sites, et cetera. But wanted to give you some background on what experiences are and how experiences business has embraced this do things that do not scale from the beginning. And now let's dive into some more specific examples once the business was launched and as it was scaling. So one thing about our experiences business, unlike homes, the experiences business is a managed marketplace. What that means is that Airbnb says yes or no, and anyone who wants to list an experience has to apply to see if it's the right fit for the Airbnb vision and to be on our platform. And so we've established quality standards. Now, and this is very well shared in terms of anyone who wants to apply for an experience to host an experience, we're looking for expertise, where it's people who can share a unique perspective or insider knowledge. We're looking for access, in terms of being able to do something you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And we're looking for connection, where it's interactive and people are building bridges and actually interacting and spending time and learning about each other. But when we think about the early days, we didn't know exactly what those attributes were, what actually made an experience magical and differentiated and part of fulfilling the Airbnb mission vision of belonging anywhere. And how we did that was an Airbnb employee went on every potential experience to decide if it should be added. Does this scale? Absolutely not, because that meant employees flying around the world and going out on experiences that may or may not make it on the platform. But it was a way to learn. And we were learning what made something magical and what the common attributes were across those different experiences and across those different hosts and across all of the looking for the commonalities in terms of what made it an Airbnb experience. And that's how we distilled down to those 3 attributes: expertise, access, and connection. There were multiple iterations of those attributes as we defined what they were. And now, as we look at how to scale that in terms of how to scale a managed marketplace with quality standards, we've developed a scoring algorithm for new host submissions that's influenced the information that we collect when you submit an application for a new experience. And while there is still some human touch in terms of reviewing it and looking at, all the information collected in terms of doing that final yes or no, does it make past the threshold to be on the platform, it's a lot more scalable. And then you could argue, having any human touch, is that scalable to when we were having 1 million experiences on the platform? And the answer is no. And so then we are looking at how we're doing continuous feedback on those attributes through guest reviews. We're giving that feedback to the host, and we're having more of a closed loop ecosystem where we're able to maintain that quality and get continuous signal on it, and able to therefore remove low-rated inventory, and that way make sure that we're continuing to keep the quality standards and making sure the experience is the differentiated magical experience that we have as part of our brand promise. And how are we doing that? Giving you some insights into our product. You can see here, this is from the host dashboard, where we share with the hosts, these are the things that we're asking the guests in the reviews, and here's the feedback that they've given you about these key areas that are important to us to make sure that this experience stays a great addition to our platform. And you can see here, not only are we telling them what we're looking for, but we're giving them feedback on what they can do to potentially improve it, and how they're scoring, and how their guests are feeling, and how it's potentially changing over time. So we also make sure that we're not just taking a snapshot of quality at only one point in time. So it's come a long way, right? We go from an employee going on every experience and making sure it can be on the platform, to something that's more of a scoring algorithm, to something where we're getting continuous signal from our community, as opposed to having to do it with one person going out and doing various things. Another example that I love talking about is our merchandising. So if we flash back to the launch of Airbnb experiences, if you remember back, or we have these still all over our office, it was originally all of the experiences were launched with very specialized merchandising. They were all having posters that essentially looked like a movie poster, like what you would have seen in the old days at a red carpet event, things outside of a movie advertising a new movie. And every experience that was on the platform had one of these. When you go and look at our merchandising and things today, you don't see this anymore. All the screenshots that I've shown you are actually real hosts. And so when we think about merchandising, this was a challenge. When we look at, having a differentiated magical product, the merchandising is really important. When you look at Airbnb's experiences, you need to understand how they're different than, for example, one of the big red bus tours, or a group of 80 people walking around following somebody, visiting tourist sites with a flag. How is it different? You have to be able to see it immediately when you look at the merchandising. And so we really needed to figure out a way for our merchandising to communicate the magic of the experiences and capture our customers' attention. And that's not necessarily easy to do, because merchandising isn't easy, and it's especially getting really high quality content isn't always easy. When you look at the imagining the ideal outcome, when Airbnb launched, Airbnb went out and shot footage and created merchandise for every experience that was on the platform, which you could see, if I go back a slide, in these posters and these photo shoots. Does that scale? Obviously not, because this was also free. It goes back to a lot of the things in the early days of Airbnb when we had professional photography that was part of the experience of listing on your home on Airbnb. But by doing that, we were able to figure out what type of merchandising worked, what made guests really interested, because we were able to take really high quality content, and we were able to then take a whole bunch of different pieces, like in angles and shots of the experience, and figure out what the formula was for what potential guests wanted to see to help them feel comfortable with their purchase and know what they were going to get. And so we started creating that formula. And by doing that, we can now empower the hosts to create their own merchandising and their own content, and giving them that formula and giving them that guidance. And that's the first step to helping it scale. We still had some human touch, especially for the really top experiences, because it's really hard for people to get professional quality sound equipment and cameras, and you'll notice we have a lot more video and interaction on the platform. That's hard to do still with user-generated content, but we've come a long way now where almost all of the content that we have in our merchandising is actually generated by the hosts themselves. And if we go even further, as we think about scaling, as the experience of looking at the customer experience of looking at an activity or an experience on the platform becomes a lot more interactive, we can start developing algorithms that tag the content hosts create in terms of not only collecting content from the host, but also collecting content from the guests in terms of the pictures that they take, et cetera. And figuring out how to actually display all of that with a really nice story arc based on the type of experience, because maybe a walking tour has a different story arc than a boxing class with a professional boxer, than a cooking experience with grandma in Italy. And so we're able to then craft it and make it a much more personalized story and a much more content much closer tied to the experience. But again, it's in a way that's automated and scaled based on what we learned, from actually producing and merchandising a lot of the experiences by hand. So this, again, has come a long way. And this was one of the main things we were investing in, is how to actually make really high quality merchandising that scales, and empowering the hosts in our community to actually do it with their own content. And to show you a little bit of what it looks like in product, when a host is listing and merchandising their experience, these are some of the tips that we give them. We tell them the types of photos that we're looking for. We tell them we want people in it, to show them actually doing the activity, to show the setting, to also make sure it's not blurry, don't add filters, all of those types of things. And we give them almost a little template of, here's what we want. We want at least 7 high quality photos, reiterating those requirements. And then we actually have little spaces for them to fill. Show yourself leading the activity. Make sure it's not selfies where people are standing and posing. It's got to be like a in real life capture. Show us like a close up of what they'll actually be doing. Show us something further away with the location and the group in terms of where people will be, so that we can help our guests actually understand what the experience is all about, and they can get a much better feeling as opposed to just looking at some very surface level photographs and content. This is the first step. It can go much further, where we can even have them be able to do it live in the platform and collect even more content from guests, giving it back to the host in terms of guests actually taking video of the hosts and things like that, so that we can start building this library of really great user-generated content. Again, has come a really long way from the days of do not scale, when we were sending Airbnb employees out to every experience to actually do the photo shoots and do the content collection and content creation for every single experience. And I see some of these are coming up already in questions. And I wanted to give you, as we wrap up, I know we've gone through a lot of examples, how you can take this away and do things that don't scale in your organizations, regardless of where you are in your product journey or what type of company you are. And I just say, keep it simple. One of the things that I found really successful is just starting with a simple question: how might we? And in this case, the question is, how might we learn more about this opportunity in the fastest, cheapest way possible? So if I want to learn about using more user-generated content and merchandising, if I want to learn more about how I maintain quality standards, let's get creative. And we do this often. My designer that I worked with introduced this to me and I loved it. Crazy Eights, where everyone on the team, you fold your paper into 8 little squares, and everyone on the team has to come up with 8 questions to this answer in a time boxed, give them 15, 20 minutes. And so you don't censor your thinking. It's just nothing's there. We don't overthink it. Just get the ideas out, and then everyone shares and build on each other's ideas after that. And it's do we send people out to do photographs? Do we, have the host send us all of their pictures and give them critiques, and then actually, build it with the host pictures instead of sending it ourselves? And there's just any idea is possible. And the benefit of this is your first idea is never the only idea, and it's very rarely the best idea. And so what you're trying to do here is get over that roadblock of well, this might not be good enough. It's let's just throw everything at the wall, and then we'll refine and cut it back after that. And that goes back to, a lot of this imagining the ideal outcome. It's stretching your brain for what is potentially possible before you start limiting it and adding constraints. Because if we limit and add constraints from the beginning, then nothing's possible. And we can easily kind of kill any idea, whether it's an idea worth pursuing or not. And so it's giving it a little bit of space to see if it can turn into something promising. And then when we talk about working backwards, then we put on a different part of our brains and actually figure out how to bring it to a much larger audience. And so wrapping up, why do we do things that don't scale? It goes back to that concept of learning. We want to learn and deliver results faster. And so the way to do that is to minimize the time and expense that you spend trying to learn something, which is essentially what we're doing in all of those upstream processes as we're developing product requirements documents, business cases, market research. If you can do things that don't scale as you're going through those processes, you'll learn much faster. And it doesn't mean you have to do it with every single user. The way to think about it is think about what you can do with only 1 or 2 users that will help you learn, because what you'll learn is going to be way more than what you would learn sitting in a building, kind of building up assumptions or working on a model or a market research kind of analysis out of documents or something like that. So with that, we'll hand over for some questions, and we'll answer a few questions. If you don't get a chance, how to get in touch with me, add me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active. So feel free to add me, email me with a question, and happy to keep the conversation going.
Thank you for that, Colleen. That was very insightful and great real world examples too. Now, there are a few questions already which we will ask you, but one thing that sort of comes to mind when we especially deal with software-powered products, the whole notion is to build something and scale it up fast. And this is seemed to be a bit anti-pattern of the, do things that don't scale first. How one could bring that mindset forward and kind of, because it is readjusting your way of thinking to a point. And how do organizations, I mean, Airbnb does this exceptionally well. In fact, one of the interviews that Brian Chesky had, I'm personally, I follow a lot of stories around Airbnb, but other tech companies too, was that, it was asked that, go and do, meet your customers. And this possibly resonated with the culture that has been instilled, which is, how do you explore opportunities? What would you say are some things that, the audience can take away in moving into that mindset?
Yeah. And, the thing I say of why you want to do things that don't scale is because it increases your confidence that when you invest in actually scaling it, that it's going to turn out how you expect. And so whenever I see my team, or, this still happens, like because our human nature is to just jump into the solution. And us as product managers, you have to stop that, right? And it's still hard sometimes, because sometimes you have to stop yourself. And it goes back to, what am I missing? What blind spots, what assumptions, what confirmation bias might we have in this? And how can we test that really fast and increase our confidence that what we're about to invest a quarter in, or even a few months, or even a few weeks, that will increase our confidence that what we're about to invest in is going to deliver us the results that we expect. Because I think we've all been in that place where, like I did with my Etsy shop, I have these business cards, I have all this stuff, and I launch and there's crickets, right? And you're like, but why didn't it happen that way? I did all the market research. Everything I did said that this should have worked, but it didn't, because I didn't get it in front of my customers. And a lot of times we think it has to be perfect. We have to have a high fidelity prototype. We have to have something that I can, release in an A/B test, but as my first test. And that's waiting way too long. And so it goes back to that, doing things that don't scale. Start with saying, what can I do with just 1 or 2 people? And if you find that getting some traction, then say, okay, well then how do I expand this? So now I'm not doing it with 1 or 2 people. Maybe I'm doing it with 20. And then maybe I'm doing it with 100. And then maybe I'm getting to the place where I can start A/B testing and I'm doing it with a percentage of my population, right? But it starts to be a more gradual process that's building on something, as opposed to us just sitting there hoping and relying on assumptions or analysis that we've done in the building without, again, getting it in front of our customers. And so I think that's the piece of the question I would ask, is if there's pushback, is, what are we relying on in terms of our confidence level of this generating the results that we're expecting? And that forces everybody to then think about the assumptions. And if we're relying on market research, or we're relying on a model of, an impact assessment or a document, then it's saying, well, how do we actually make sure that this is based in our customer and based in our customer insights? And then the question becomes, well, how do we get this in front of our customer to test it as fast as possible? And that goes into that how might we, where you can get scrappy. And I would encourage you and the team to just think about one person. And a lot of these things you could test in like a day or two. The Airbnb stories, I'm telling you about the success stories, right? And these are the things that we built upon. But there's plenty of things that we'll do once a week that it's like, well, that didn't work. Let's move on to the next thing, right? And so it's those types of getting those learnings so that the things that you put on the roadmap and that you're really investing in, you have a lot more confidence that they're the things that are going to give you the results you're looking for.
Yeah, well, that's very insightful. I've got a question from Suku, I believe. Do you notice that what you're saying, don't scale, actually do scale by offloading it to customers? Is it a case of invest in a model, validate work, and ask how can we automate the offload? Which is essentially, you answered that question, but if you want to elaborate a little bit further.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly it. Like when we talk about, in this Airbnb, Brian will often say it's like a different part of your brain, or sometimes it might even be two different people. Some people are really good at like imagining that perfect situation and figuring out what the model is. It's almost like you're finding product market fit. But I don't want to figure out how to deliver it to 1 million people if I don't know that it has product market fit, even for a feature. And so this is the exact piece of like, figure out what the model is, or figure out what the feature is, or figure out what it should be, and do that as fast as possible, which generally means that you're going to do it in a very small use case or a very unscalable way. And then turn on a different part of your brain and figure out, well, do we automate it? Do we offload it to our community? Do we have our customers do it and figure that out? But figure that out later. Because if you try to figure that out first, you still don't even know if it's what you should do. And so why waste all that time and energy if that's not what you should be doing in terms of where you're trying to take your product and where you're trying to grow your customer base?
Fantastic. Thank you so much. There are a few more questions, but I think we are, out of time. I'd like to thank you guys, the speakers, for making this, as exciting as it has been. Certainly, if there are any questions, we will sort of reach out to you, Colleen. But it's been a pleasure. I'd like to thank the audience as well, and we hope to see you in November.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.